everybody, Raul here for Bass Musician Magazine, and today we have the great honor and pleasure of chatting with bassist Dave Meros. Many of
Good
you,
morning.
there you go. Many of you remember Dave from Spock's Beard. You may have seen him with Animals, Iron Butterfly, and more recently, and one big thing we want to talk about is pattern-seeking animals. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I like to go back to the past. How did you get started in music and on bass, Dave?
Well, bass came kind of late for me. I started on piano when I was a kid. My dad, somebody gave him a piano, and I took a lot of interest in that. My parents got me lessons. I had a phenomenally good teacher who started teaching me, besides the classical stuff, she started teaching me chord theory and ear training and all of this stuff. I mean, it was pretty heavy duty, too. We'd have examinations. This guy would come down from a local music college, and she'd go C sharp, melodic minor, 3 octaves, both hands at this tempo, go. It was really, really good training at a fairly young age, and I was really into that. And after a few years, my family moved, and I got a piano teacher that was really boring, and I became immediately disinterested. And I was in junior high by then. It's like 12, 13, high school maybe, whatever age you start at that point. And I was interested in the band then, because that was the cool way to play music. Piano wasn't cool at the time, you know. All the rock bands were all guitar oriented, and so I started playing different horns, bounced around all the different brass instruments. Went to UC Berkeley and got into the jazz ensemble there, playing bass trombone. I was 20, and one of my friends called one day and said, "Hey, you want to be in a band?" And I said, "Oh yeah, absolutely. What is it?" You know, and he goes, "Well, it's a rock band, and we need a bass player." And I said, "Well, you know, dude, I don't play bass." But when I was in high school, my brother had started guitar lessons, and he quit, and he had 2 lessons left. And so I took the 2 lessons, and so I kind of knew where some notes were, and I knew where the strings, how they were tuned. I go, "I don't play bass," and he goes, "You can do it. Come on, you can." And I go, "I don't have a bass." And he goes, "The guitar player has a bass and an amp." And so I go, "Well, okay, I'll try," you know. So I found out at that first rehearsal that I had been a bass player my whole life. I just didn't know it because I always listened to bass parts. And I had all these bass parts just kind of stored in my head. I couldn't sing a lyric to save my life or, you know, tell you what the guitar solo was or anything, but I had all these memorized bass parts, and I picked up the bass, and I kind of had this rudimentary knowledge of here's an A, and I just kind of started playing, and it was really weird. It was like, wow, I can do it, you know, kind of automatically. And I was at UC Berkeley, and I played a fraternity party. No, it was a dorm party. A few weeks later, I just started playing in gigs, you know, and I really got into it. I thought I was going to be a rock star. I got my business degree, but never pursued that at all. I just was bitten by the bug, you know. I just started playing music. But I did get a late start, and I wish I could go back and start earlier, because when you're younger, there's a certain learning thing you go through that's different than when you learn when you're older. And you're fearless, and you try stuff, and I never really learned jazz. If I was younger, I would have gone through the jazz band thing, and, you know, I probably would have been a little bit more schooled player than I am now. But I didn't, and I kept going anyway, so.
There you go. Well, there's no absolute path to the journey, you know, and there are people that start young and do great. There's people that start young and burn out because they did too much too fast. You know, there's all kinds of approaches. Now, after it sounded like you'd had so much musical education, both with, you know, the horns and the piano and stuff. Did you pursue any additional education with bass, or were you pretty much self-taught from there on out?
I'm pretty much self-taught. A couple points, you know, I tried to get like these little bebop Bible and stuff and try to teach myself jazz, and my brain doesn't think in that way. And I could never latch on. I can't hear that, you know? And so I just got frustrated and So it's all self-taught, and I went through a lot of different phases in music, and each phase I got into pretty heavily. When I was into rock, I'd learn all the things about rock, and when I was into R&B and funk, I was really into that for a while, and so I kind of immersed myself in a self-taught kind of way in a lot of different styles.
Now, leaping ahead into talking a little bit about Spock's Beard, that was early '90s.
Yeah. Yeah, 93, I think, is when I started with them. I wasn't even called Spock's Beard when I joined. There was no band name at the time. It was just starting.
Well, band names are a whole other, it could be a long and drawn out topic, but...
Oh, that's the hardest part.
I know.
Thinking of a band name. Arguments and lists of names, and it's hilarious.
Yeah. Well, there was a whole collection of 50 band names, and there were bands that ended up with good names, but they had terrible names to start out with. Unfortunately, somebody changed them, but I digress. Moving along. So there, with Spock's Beard, you guys were falling within kind of the parameters of prog rock. As we forward ahead to Pattern-Seeking Animals, it is a lot of the members from Spock's Beard, but also kind of falls into a prog art rock kind of box.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's got elements of prog rock. I prefer the term art rock myself because the feeling I get from Pattern Seeking Animals is the same feeling that I get when I listen to the art rock albums like 10cc or Styx or whatever you would call art rock back in the 70s,
Yeah.
And the fact that it's kind of cross-genre and very melodic and stuff, prog rock is kind of like seems to be diverging off into the shredder category these days, and so art rock seems to be a little bit more of a fitting title.
Gotcha. Well, it's kind of a question of philosophy because I've talked to some groups that had sounds very similar to what you've mentioned, especially like Styx and things like that, and they were in the prog rock box, if you will, but they felt that it was because they were kind of progressing. I guess it's kind of in an active way that the rock was evolving and moving ahead. So it was prog rock.
Yeah.
It's kind of a looser definition.
Oh, you can get in horrible arguments from people about that. Is Pink Floyd a prog band? I mean, I know people that will just get really angry if you call Pink Floyd a prog band. Jethro Tull, it's like, those aren't prog bands. It's like, well, yes, I don't know. I think they are. Progressive rock.
Yes.
It was rock that was progressive.
At the time, yes.
Yeah.
So it's all relative. So moving on with Pattern Seeking Animals, you guys recently released a debut album earlier this year by the same name, Pattern Seeking Animals. I had the opportunity to watch some of the videos, No Burden Left, No One Ever Died and Made Me King, and Orphans of the Universe. And each one is unique. So it's very cool. They don't fall into, oh, here's another one of these. Each one, right. I could have been listening to 3 different bands when I was watching these. Tell us a little more about the music that you guys are working on.
Yeah, especially this first album. It's kind of bits and pieces that weren't accepted by other projects. And John has a pretty huge musical vocabulary and really diverse musical tastes. So... And those 3 videos that you mentioned, I think are probably the 3 most divergent ones. If you listen to the album, it sounds like a band, not so all over the place. Especially like No One Ever Dies and Made Me King. That's kind of an outlier stylistically. And so if you hear that and then a couple things on either side of it, it'll be like, oh, where are these guys? But if you hear the whole record, it kind of makes a little bit more sense in there. But yeah, John just writes, instead of trying to be cubbyholed into a certain style, I'm writing for this band. It's more along the lines of what he personally is being satisfied with musically. He's following his bliss a little bit more in this.
So... So moving along with that too, plans for the future. I know you guys have playing Sarasota in 2020.
Yeah.
And kind of the goal is to get touring and maybe try to do an album a year, if I understand.
Yeah, the second album is very far along right now, actually. We did have all the drums and bass completed, but then John was having second thoughts about one song, and he wrote another big, long 11-minute epic thing. And Jimmy just recorded drums 4 or 5 days ago, and I just saw my little Dropbox notification. I think the stems are being uploaded as we speak. So I have another bass track to cut, but then drums and bass will be finished, and Ted has been working really hard on vocals and guitars. So we're very far along on the second album. I think it's going to be probably a spring release next year. In gigs and tours, we want to do it, but it's kind of hard to get together. So we're just taking it one day at a time. We've got the one gig booked, and if anything comes across that makes sense, we'll go do it. We're a band that's a startup band, so it's hard to kind of get that aspect of it rolling. It's hard these days to do a tour and have it not lose money.
Yeah.
And, that's always important. You don't want to lose a bunch of money. Spox was famous at losing money on tours. Oh, my God.
Oh, wow.
We had tour support for a while. That stopped. And after that, we tried a couple more tours and lost a boatload of money. And it's like, okay, I guess we can't afford to do this much more. That's why we stopped playing a lot. We just do gigs here and there. Spox does have a gig coming up February 1st and 2nd down in L.A.
Gotcha.
At this little place called Alva's. But yeah, it's a tough world out there these days.
Well, and even with that, you're also playing with Iron Butterfly.
Yeah, that's fun.
That goes back. I can remember looking at Iron Butterfly albums when I was a kid.
Yeah, I remember distinctly. You have those moments in your life that you can remember, like you can replay it like it's a video. Mm-hmm. And I remember distinctly the first time I heard Iron Butterfly. I was 12. Was I 12? Yeah, I was 12 at this little teenager party, and somebody brought it in and put it on the record player. And I can just go back to that moment, because it was like something I'd never heard before. It's like, what is this thing?
Yeah.
And a 7-minute drum solo. Oh my God, So yeah, that was, and it's a really fun band to play with. A lot of the reason is the bass player was really good. I mean, he's one of those unsung heroes that nobody, how many people have heard of Lee Dorman? Not many.
Yeah.
But he's one of those guys that should have been up there, with like all the guys, the famous John Entwistle and those guys. His bass parts were really, really interesting and really fun to play. And the bass player that Iron Butterfly had before was really good too. They've always had really good bass players, so it's fun for me. And it's a completely different horn that I'm playing too. I'm playing a short scale bass with flat wounds through like, usually an SVT that's turned up and it's all like hippie sounding, and it's fun.
Yeah.
I like that.
Well, and that raises the topic of gear, and especially we'll come back to Pattern Seeking Animals. How are you getting you sound? What instruments are you playing? Because you've got some unique stuff.
Well, so far, Pattern Seeking Animals has only been studio. So my studio thing is whatever bass works for the song. And on Pattern Seeking Animals, I've used quite a number of basses. I've wound up, a lot of those are written in C and D and stuff. So I've playing a 5-string on a lot of that album.
Gotcha.
But also, I'm using my Frankenstein Fender Bacher thing that I built. I'm using that on a few of them too. And there's a couple different 5-strings. I'm using an older Yamaha BB broad bass 5-string, which has the best vintage P bass sound. Then I use a Carruthers 5-string on one or two. It's got active electronics. It's got the EMG pickups and preamp, and then my Fender Bacher Frankenstein thing. And there might be a fretless in a couple little spots there, which is just some odd thing that I put together. All my basses are just spare parts, mostly. I don't have anything that's worth anything on the open market. If I went to sell them, it'd be like, well, I don't know, $200 maybe, 150.
Before we were recording, we'd also had a chance to talk a little bit about the OLP. I thought that was kind of an interesting. It's kind of looks like a Music Man, but it's been modified. It's not exactly. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, I kind of accidentally sold my Rickenbacker when we were doing our 10th album, we had this big fundraising thing for that album because we originally released it independently. Everybody put instruments of their own up for auction to raise money.
Oh, wow.
And I was kind of angry at my Rickenbacker at the time, so I put it up there, and I put it up for a really high amount of money that I thought it would never sell for. If it did, it would raise a lot of money for the album, but I didn't think it would sell, and it did. I was like, oh no. And I thought about it, right after, before I shipped it, it was like, damn, I'm going to miss this thing.
Yeah.
Oh, well, it's gone now. And it went, so I needed something that would do it. And so the OLP was like this idea that I had. I thought I could do a thing with the pickup coils to make it, and put another pickup in there and make it sound like a Rick. Mm-hmm. It didn't work at all. But the bass, it had a good body and neck, so I just kept hacking away at it, and I put a Rickenbacker pickup in the neck position and a 50s Seymour Duncan style P-bass, the single coil kind of a telly pickup, the bridge position, and did a bunch of little other doodads on there. It wound up sounding really good, and I used that for a while and until I could build my other weirdo bass that I've used for the last few years.
It is interesting because it's like Fender neck and Rickenbacker body.
Yeah.
So what is it about that combination that you like?
I have these ideas, and I kind of feel obligated to follow them through. I was actually going to buy another Rickenbacker and modify it, but I didn't want to buy a really good, nice, new, shiny Rick and do that because that's sacrilege to get a new Rick and just start carving it up,
Yeah.
So I wanted an old trashed one, but in the meantime, the prices of used Ricks had gone up ridiculously. And so to buy a Rick that I was going to carve up was still going to cost $1,300 or $1,400. And I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to spend that much money on something that I feel okay with carving up, So I went down to this hardwood place and got a big chunk of alder and cut a body blank out of it and had this idea. It's like, well, I like jazz bass necks, so I'll just do that, Yeah, it took a while to get that all put together, but it turned out pretty good. It's got an alder body and a Rick-ish shape. It's not exactly Rick, but it's contoured like a Fender, with the belly cut and the arm contour thing. And
Sure.
It's got two sets of pickups, one set where the Rick pickups go and one set kind of where a PJ set would go. And it's got the little capacitor on the bridge pickup that I can switch in and out for vintage or modern Rick sound, and it's got a drop D thing on there. It had the neck plecked. I don't know if you're familiar with the pleck machine. It's this automated computer controlled fret leveling system. They're like $250,000 machines, and it gets your frets like absolutely perfect. And so it's got a cool neck on it, which I've actually replaced the neck since then. It was a maple neck. I put a rosewood neck on it just recently that plays also really good. I've carved that up a few times since I finished it too.
Sure.
I just can't stop. I put like 3 different sets of pickups in it, just wondering which one is going to sound the best. And I've got another set sitting here that I want to try for the Rickenbacker position ones. It might sound a little bit Ricky-er. So yeah, I'm kind of a OCD with that kind of stuff.
There you go. Well, I think that's one of the reasons we keep getting some interesting signature basses as well, that musicians like yourself will come up with a change. I know Billy Sheehan, his Yamaha, part of the change that he did initially was a Rickenbacker pickup kind of at the neck.
Yeah.
And it was ugly. You look at the pictures of the original because he routed that out. The wires were...
I've seen that, yeah. Well, see, that's the kind of stuff I do. And you had the 2 outputs. Up until very recently, I was using kind of that same technique. I've been using it for years. I didn't know anyone else was doing it. It turns out that, it's basically the Rico sound thing where you run the neck pickup through one amp and the bridge pickup through another amp. I've been doing that. I've had to have either a 2-channel amp for playing live or 2 amps. And, it works really good. You can get that really dirty, gnarly sound for the top end, but then you can just roll nice, clean low end in underneath it with the other amp. And, that's the way to do it, because if you try to just distort the whole sound, it's just kind of too fuzzy and the low end's really out of control and not tight. That's another thing I just did to my Frankenstein thing. I put a Rico sound kind of pickup in it so I can run. Oh, I didn't finish my live setup. We haven't done any live gigs yet, but I just got a Line 6 Helix Stomp.
Oh.
Not their full pedal board, but the little one.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I want something I can just throw in the suitcase. I put this Rico sound kind of output jack in my bass so I can run one pickup into one input of that stomp and then the other pickup into another input stomp, run each of them through a different amp model. Get a Marshall on top and a SVT or something on the bottom. Hopefully, get my sound without having to lug a bunch of gear.
And since you mentioned the pedal, are there other elements of your sound? Strings, instrument cables?
A cable, I don't care about cables. I mean, I use a monster cable only because I wound up with one, but I'm not one of those guys that obsesses over the cable. And for my sound is pretty lo-fi anyway. I mean, if you spectrum analyze it, it probably has nothing below a certain and nothing above a certain frequency. It's all, it's got some low end and then a whole bunch of distorted mid-range. So, having a little extra 8.5K is, I actually don't want that. Yeah, and I was going to say for the recording thing, I record DI only. I use amp modelers for my sound. And I use almost exclusively the IK Multimedia. It's part of the Amplitude thing. It's the Ampeg SVX. It's really good. I've been using that for years. I've tried to compare it to all the other Ampeg models, and I just bought the dark glass stuff, and I get really excited about all these things, and I try them out, and it's like the Ampeg SVX is still the one that works the best for me, like almost every time. So I'm really happy with that. I should be endorsed by them because I'm always like praising them so much, but it works. I love it.
Looking ahead, I know we talked a little bit about the gig and future albums. Any other projects, any other things you've got in the works, maybe outside of Pattern Seeking Animals?
No, I do a session here and there for other guys, and Ted and Jimmy and I, basically the Pattern Seeking Animals band, we've got a cover band, and so we play a lot of weddings and horrible gigs together. So it's, we do some good music, but a lot of Keisha and Lady Gaga and stuff as well. So that, it's very humbling and grounding, that's for sure. Mm-hmm. But it's fun to play with those guys. So even if we're playing some horrible song, we can like look at each other and it's like, yeah, here we are, the glamour of it all.
Well, I don't think there's probably a musician out there that hasn't maybe played with a band that it was more the idea of getting out and playing more than the music itself. That they go, oh, I don't love what we're playing, but hey, we're out there and we're playing. True story, I came across an article. I played with a band back in the 70s, and a review of one of our performances popped up online from 72, New York Times.
That's awesome.
Oh, man, he ripped us up so bad. I'm glad I didn't see it then. It was terrible.
I love those.
Yeah, but I agreed with him. I'm like, yeah, I get what he was saying, and at the time, that was an accurate assessment of what we were doing.
Oh, I love those bad reviews sometimes, especially the scathing ones. Spox has gotten a few of those, and I've saved them because this is brilliant. I mean, some people get really, really nasty,
Yeah.
to the point where it's really funny, and so I'll save them.
Yeah. Well, Dave, we appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule. We're looking forward to seeing all the upcoming things with Pattern Seeking Animals. If people want to know more about that, they can go to psanimals1.com.
Yeah.
Perfect. And you guys are on Facebook too?
Yeah, there's a Facebook page and also a Pattern Seeking Animals forum page. If you want to upload photos or chime in, tell us how much you love us.
There you go. Well, yeah. Dave, thanks again, folks. You've seen him here, Dave Meros on Bass Musician Magazine.
you.